Let's move to our next session. This is called Conversations with Cops, and in this one we're going to first hear firsthand from serving and retired police officers about day-to-day challenges that they face. Many of you in the room and watching online will recognise a lot of what you're about to hear. We'll explore how policing has evolved over the past decade, particularly in the light of declining number of experienced officers available to support and mentor. These are crucial areas. And we're also going to be joined by the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, who will share his perspective on these issues and the wider implications. PS Chris Smy is with us from Suffolk Police. Good afternoon to you. Steve Bolsover is with us as well, retired police sergeant from Cleveland Police. Good to see you, Steve. And Ian Burdett from the City of London Police, 30 years in the job. Let's start, Ian, with you firstly. It's a big question. What's changed in 30 years?
I think a lot's changed in 30 years. Probably...
Is it unrecognisable?
I think things have become... Like training, for instance. Training at one point, classroom-based. You went there, training was delivered by somebody who knew the subject. You had the ability to question them. And when you walked out there, you pretty much knew what you'd been taught. Whereas now, a lot of it's just online, end-count-based sort of stuff, and whether people, click through and understand it fully, understand it a bit, but there's no, I think the training is certainly, from an employer's point of view, they've delivered a training package.
Yeah.
But from the officer on the ground who's then got to sort of remember that, is it good training? So
is it kind of almost sort of the soul has been taken out of the job in some respects?
A little bit, yeah. Obviously it's sort of money based. I assume it's a lot cheaper to deliver online training.
Yeah.
But ultimately, especially in this current day and age, we're subject to a lot more scrutiny.
Yeah.
And sometimes the training, well, not sometimes, the training should be better.
Sure. And Chris, you've been in the job a long time, started out as a special, moved into it because you thought this is, clearly the better future. So in that period of time, have you noticed substantial changes?
In 12 years, it's not recognisable. It's not the same. As Ian said, the training, my training, loved it, learned everything that I could.
Sure.
Thrown out there with a tutor. Now you've got people that are tutoring that haven't even finished their probation.
Wow. And is that kind of you and your colleagues, I would imagine, painfully aware of the challenges that particular situation throws?
We're worried for the public, we're worried for our colleagues,
yeah,
because of the scrutiny. And you can't stand there and go, I didn't know.
Yeah. Also, equally as experienced, Steve Bolsover joins us online as well from Cleveland, former Cleveland Police Sergeant. Good afternoon, good morning to you, Steve.
Morning.
Nice to see you again. I say former Police Sergeant. Wasn't meant to be that way a couple of years ago.
No, unfortunately, going back to November 2023, I was on duty shift. Round about midnight, it was a car had been set on fire in Hemlington. And 4 males. So I directed a couple of patrols up there and obviously tried to burn the CCTV camera out. And then obviously resume your duties. I ended up meeting up at the domestic incident with a single crewed officer and told him to come to me. We went back up to Hemlington to patrol the area and the officer noticed that another fire had been set. We proceed to go out. The officer disappears from my view. I go and look for him, and he's by 6 drunken males, all verbally abused, as you can imagine, and that escalated from issuing numerous warnings to trying to make an arrest, whereby the male that we tried to arrest fought viciously. He's a big male. There was only me and the officer up there. The unit director to stay there for some reason gone. So during that altercation of trying to arrest them, like I say, he was fighting. I got about 1 male towards me, and then bricks and bottles started raining down. and to the point whereby with a big hole in my hand, the bottle had gone into my chin. One of the males ran up with a house brick, trying to brick me in the head. Thankfully, I managed to just step to the side as he threw that. And then tried to disperse them. They ran off, destroyed the police vehicle. I then had to go and assist the probationary officer who was still struggling, trying to arrest this male. The people come out of the house and were trying to get stuff from him. He tried to break him free. So I ended up battling a couple more people. And lo and behold, to me, as units arrived, one of the officers said to me, "You need to come with me now." And I didn't realise what he was meaning. He thought I'd had my throat cut because there was that much blood coming down my chin and hand and what have you. So ended up going, obviously, to hospital. Ended the following day, I had surgery. But what had happened was that when the bottle had exploded on my hand, it had gone into my chin as well. So that's why the officer had thought I'd had my throat cut. So as a result of that, like I say, I had surgery to repair the muscle and the nerve. Over time, that healed properly. I don't have a full grip. Was diagnosed with complex PTSD. That's the consultant psychiatrist said, I will never work again, basically. So that literally, that one night ended my career.
Yeah. Which shockingly defines the plight of many officers on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis. Very few jobs in the land end up with a story such as that. Stay with us, Steve. Let's bring in the Right Honourable Chris Philp, MP, Shadow Home Secretary. Chris, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Of course, former Policing Minister as well. I mean, you're familiar with these kind of stories. I mean, look, we know, everybody knows, everyone in this room watching on the panel, it's a tough job. Everyone went into policing, knew it was going to be a tough job. But what people, I suppose, officers, serving officers, are concerned about is, why is it being made even tougher than it needs to be, whether it's bureaucracy, lack of experience, recruitment, officers leaving, or the situations you just heard from Steve. I mean, it's a pretty mixed bag, and it's a troubling scenario.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is a tough job. And the first thing I'd like to do is say thank you to all of the serving police officers who are listening this morning for the work that you do to keep the rest of us safe. Certainly I know all of my constituents in Croydon, speaking for colleagues across Parliament as well. We know that every morning when a police officer puts his or her uniform on, they're taking a personal risk in a way that very few other professions do. And I wanted to start by saying thank you for the sacrifices you're making in keeping the rest of us safe. And obviously the story that Steve just told us from what happened to him in Cleveland illustrates quite powerfully the risks that officers run on a daily basis. So I think it is therefore up to the government to make sure that officers are supported. That means not just helping people who find themselves in Steve's position. It means making sure pay and conditions are fair. It means making sure the support is available. It means making sure, we heard talking about training a minute ago, making sure that is improved. And with so many officers having joined the force in the last 5 years or so, I think over half of officers now have less than 5 years service. So I think we need to try and find ways of encouraging more experienced officers to stay, possibly even beyond the 30 years, by making changes to the pension abatement rules, so that while these newer officers get trained up, we try and keep those experienced officers in post a bit longer. At the moment, the way the pension rules work, they're incentivised to leave. Whereas I think particularly at this moment, particularly for the next few years, we need to keep their service. I think the other point is we need to ensure officers are properly supported when they do make difficult judgments, whether that's the lethal use of a firearm, high-speed pursuit, tactical contact, the use of force in making an arrest, stop and search, whatever it may be. I think officers need to know that when they use those powers, obviously lawfully, they're going to be supported. And I think the IOPC is too quick to open investigations, and officers can often get essentially harassed for a number of months or even years for basically just doing their job to keep us safe. And we need officers to have the confidence to use those powers and not feel they've got to hold back when it comes to apprehending a criminal or protecting the public. because they're worried about getting busted for misconduct, or even in extreme cases, prosecuted. So I think that balance is currently in the wrong place and needs to change.
And Ian, do you say, look, officers don't want politicians interfering with every moment of their working life, but you do want politicians to have your back, right? That, you know, the very people that put the system together vote on legislation. You want to know the support.
Police officers want politicians and senior officers to have their back. You know, if I was starting again or much younger in service and I look at the jobs that police officers have, would I consider firearms? No, I wouldn't, because we've seen, you know, what's going on with firearms officers right now. You know, when that day comes and you have that decision to make, you've then got weeks or months of stress, basically. I wouldn't do that.
And Chris, in terms of support in the system, do you... Because again, it's only when you go over these stories about, you know, 21% real terms pay cut, a lot of inexperience on the front line. Sadly, it's great new officers join, but it means there's a disproportionality in terms of experience. All that goes along with it, we heard the story there from Steve. I mean, it's a perfect storm. You'd think, you know, what kind of person would join the police when you hear it all put together like that? But thank goodness there are diligent people that do and want to. But what you really want from that is to know that there's support from above that's going to, you know, at least be driving all of those needs and desires in the right direction. And so often it's the very opposite to that.
I can speak from personal experience, so this will probably upset people. Maybe they're watching, maybe they're not. Last year, I wanted to take my own life because I'd had enough. Mainly the job and the things I'd seen. The one that kind of pushed me over the edge was I was a negotiator. Not anymore. It's a voluntary role. Don't get anything extra for it. Same as firearms, PSU, search officers. A 13-year-old girl sat on the edge of a car park roof wanting to take her own life. The support I got after that was nothing. Nil, nothing. And even when I told my organisation how I felt, it was a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
Every bit of support I got was through myself. That was privately funded counselling, because the organisation that was meant to provide officers with counselling said, you're too difficult to deal with. We'll send a letter to your GP.
But here's an online form to tick some boxes in the meantime, which is extraordinary. There are, you know, almost 20 officers a year take their own life. We don't hear about those stories. If there were 20 GPs a year, you'd be hearing about it. But in policing, we don't. And you know, just to put that to you, Chris Philp, as Shadow Home Secretary, I mean, you've been in government. I mean, there is often a criticism, and I say this kindly to you, that, you know, in opposition, politicians talk brilliantly and passionately about things, but once in the job, it's a kind of different beast. I mean, you've heard Steve's story, you heard what Chris just said there. I mean, these should be areas where people like yourself, certainly when you're in office, have full support. It's a no-brainer, right, isn't it? These are some of the most challenging jobs in the land.
That's right, they are, as I said earlier, and people put themselves in danger daily, both physical danger, like Steve talked about, and then also psychological trauma, like Chris was just explaining a second ago. And I think the truth is the support is not good enough at the moment, and it needs to improve dramatically. Those 20 suicides a year, an absolute tragedy, could be in some cases an avoidable tragedy. So I think a lot more support needs to be put in place by individual police forces, but the government, I think nationally, need to support that as well, recognising that policing is almost uniquely difficult, both physically and psychologically. I mean, it's nothing's comparable to, you know, the armed forces obviously have similar issues, yet the armed forces covenant is a lot stronger than the police covenant. So I think the police covenant needs to be strengthened dramatically to provide the kind of support that people in the armed forces get after a hot conflict, because working on policing the streets can be comparably dangerous to working in the armed forces.
Indeed. And Steve, I think, you know, mixed bag from what I can gather in terms of your case. You've got support from some areas and not others. Would that be fair?
Yeah, initially, obviously, the organisation, fantastic. You know, a lot of the executive contacted me and stuff like that. A lot of support from wellbeing. But I've had it in the past, and look, I can resonate, you know, what the other officer said there about, you know, having suicidal thoughts and, you know, wanting to talk yourself into like that, and being in that. But when you are like that, again, you sort of like left to your own devices, because although initially things are put in place, and you signposted to counselling, EMDR therapy, and stuff like that, there's nothing in place afterwards. So for me, like say when I end up leaving, I'm now left to my own devices to try and seek further help if I need it. Yeah. And I think there should be more put in place for myself, like your officer said, afterwards, because at the end of the day, it can't go on.
And Ian, you're just by dint of years the most experienced officer here. I don't know about in the whole room, but 30 years is an impressive innings.
35, actually.
35, there you go, yeah. Have you got another 35 in you, do you think?
Probably not.
In terms of, because there was and we're going to be talking about sort of masculinity in the job in another session shortly. I mean, there was a time when these kind of, it was a case of, grow a pair, get on with it. That was and that went for all professions, but particularly in sort of tougher, more demanding areas of life. Back in the day, we didn't
Things
know,
changed,
we just got on with it. I mean, how do you feel about having experienced probably both eras?
No, that's certainly true. I mean, when I first joined the police force, I worked for the Transport Police, and in the 90s, we had a lot of, at that time, we still had the IRA, a lot of train crashes in the 90s, a lot of suicides. And there is that mentality. I've known people get out of police cars and just say, I'm not going. I'm not going to that call.
What, almost freezing at that moment?
Yeah. I mean, I used to work with a fella who, if he was in the police station and the call came out, he either wouldn't take it, and if he took it, if he was in the car and you went there, he would just become strange. It just affected him.
Yeah.
But on one occasion, he jumped out. We stopped at a crossing on the blue lights, and he was gone. So, different people.
Yeah.
But generally, you're right, that mentality...
So back then, sorry to interject you, but back then that would have just been maybe written off as, we've got a really odd officer working with us. Nobody was talking about mental
Yeah, it
health.
was. It was very different times. But these days, I don't sort of work in that area anymore. So I don't see that type of trauma.
Yeah. Difficult job, Chris Philp, for the Conservatives, because you are now in opposition. You were there for 14 years, and there will be some officers that will, not unreasonably suggest that, a lot of what we're talking about now was able to grow, become bigger and more problematic during those 14 years. What would you say to that? Do you take responsibility?
Well, I can only really speak to the couple of years I was police minister at the end of that period. And what I was able to do was firstly make sure we recruited more police officers. So numbers grew dramatically during that 2-year period, and we left office with more police officers than we'd ever had at any time before, accepting the point that someone made earlier about the fact that a lot of those, by definition, are much less experienced. I also increased the budget a lot by nearly £1 billion in the last year, which helped fund the 7% pay rise a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, the next year's pay rise under the new government was lower than that, but that 7% at least helped catch up a little bit, although more needs to be done, as you said already. And I was also working to try and strip back some of the bureaucracy that you touched on. So, for example, trying to move some of the mental health work back to the NHS, for example, to try and restrict some of the admin tasks that waste a lot of time. We only made some progress there. There's further to go. And we also started changing the rules around misconduct hearings to make sure that, as someone said earlier, we do have officers' backs when they get involved in a complaint, because if an officer takes risk to keep the public safe, whether it's the lethal use of a firearm, stop and search, use of force, tactical contact, high-speed pursuit, I need to make sure that we do have those officers.
And we've just lost Chris's line there, Chris. I don't know whether you were on mute for a second or...
Am I back now?
We've got you back, yeah. It was only the last few seconds.
I was just saying, we set in train some changes to recalibrate those misconduct rules to make sure that we do have officers' backs when they get tangled up in lethal use of a firearm, stop and search, tactical contact, use of force, to try and avoid officers getting unreasonably harassed by the misconduct process when all they're doing is trying to protect the public, to make sure that we do have their back. So those were changes we initiated about a year and a half ago, which the new government has thankfully taken forward. So quite soon we should see some real changes and avoid having officers getting dragged into months or years' worth of misconduct proceedings just for doing their jobs.
And Chris, in terms of sort of job satisfaction, and I'm always fascinated by this, I took a call from an officer on one of my radio shows a little while ago. I mean, the guy's CV of challenging experiences was off the scale. I mean, this guy had been run over, he'd been stabbed, he'd been spat at, punched, and, you know, goodness knows what. First, we thought that he must be making this up. This can't possibly happen to one man, and we checked it all out, and he'd been through, I mean, quite literally, worked in a challenging area and in a particularly challenging aspect of the job. And I said to him, do you still enjoy being a police officer? He said, I absolutely love it. And do you think that is kind of still the overarching feel, despite all the challenges? There is still a sense that, and maybe politicians know this as well, which is why it's often hard to get a pay rise, because politicians know that this is a vocation that people, on balance, mostly still love and enjoy.
It is, but most people that I joined with 12 and a half years ago want to leave. I love the job.
Yeah.
But I don't love what it's becoming.
What would need to change so that you could have a spring back? You know, when that alarm goes off and you're on the early shift and you go into work, what would need to change for you to?
There's not enough time.
Time.
There's not enough time to tell you how much needs
to
change.
See. Right, okay.
Sorry, there isn't, because everything needs to change.
Yeah. And just to bring you back, Chris Philp, into this, I mean, were you aware of this? I mean, obviously there'll be other officers with different experiences. We all understand that, but nonetheless, there does seem to be an underlying theme here that we hear time and time again. That in terms of, you know, being a cop is challenging and becoming ever more challenging. I mean, it's the 21st century. Should, in theory, be getting slightly more not, I don't mean easier, but I mean all the challenges that stand in the way should have long gone. It should be a straight road ahead, policing.
Look, I'm aware of the challenges, and I mean, just as a constituency MP in Croydon, in South London, obviously talking to the local force there, you encounter these issues quite a lot. There's a lot more needs to be done. We've talked about some of the issues: pay and conditions, support for people with both physical and mental challenges, supporting officers when they take difficult decisions, split-second decisions, making sure we take away some of the bureaucracy and the frustrations that exist today but didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago, so they can get on with protecting the public, not filling in forms. There's a whole load of things, I think, that need to change more in order to address some of the issues that we've heard raised, because ultimately it's vital that officers want to join, want to stay, and are willing to take the difficult actions that are sometimes needed to protect the public and protect and catch criminals, because without what the police do, society would essentially collapse.
Okay. Listen, Chris, thank you for being with us. Really appreciate your time, sir. Right Honourable Chris Philp, MP. He is, of course, the Shadow Home Secretary, former Policing Minister. Final question. Steve, former Sergeant with Cleveland Police. Similarly to the one we touched on with Chris a second ago, would you join the job tomorrow?
No, definitely not. No, when I still speak with officers, they're overworked. You know, there's not enough hours in the day sometimes for them to carry out the inquiries. Workload, like I say, is excessive. And then when you factor in, you know, they're carrying a workload that's unseen, that sits in the background, they're having to respond to emergencies and other priority incidents and stuff like that. And then, again, overworked, resourced, underfunded, and definitely I wouldn't join it.
All right. On that point, gents, we reach the end of this session, but thank you, Steve Bolsover. Steve is a retired police sergeant from Cleveland Police and was injured, hence retired police sergeant, medically retired after that brutal assault 2 years ago. Thank you to Chris Smy, Suffolk Police. Good to see you, Chris. Nice to have you with us. And Ian Burdett, maybe another, not 35 years in you, but a few more.